IDC Radio.
בינתחומי.
106.2 FM.
הרדיו הבינתחומי.
IDC Radio. In collaboration with כל ישראל.
106.2 FM.
IDC International Radio, 106.2 FM, from Israel to the world.
Counter-Terrorism Today.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Counter-Terrorism Today. I'm Etai Handman, and you're listening to 106.2 FM IDC International Radio. Thank you for listening on all of our platforms and viewing us on any of the wonderful platforms that we have the video up on, be it YouTube or Facebook or any of the other wonderful platforms. In studio today, we have a distinguished panel. We're going to speak about cyber terrorism, cyber counterterrorism, cyber warfare, and technologies as a whole. With us in studio today, we have Brigadier General retired Yaron Rosen. Thank you so much for joining us. For several years, he's been at the cutting edge of cyber warfare, working with international networks of practitioners, strategists, and leaders both in government and industries. General Rosen has served as an Air Force pilot for the past 32 years as distinguished officer in the IDF. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We also have with us Brigadier General of Reserves, Rami Efrati. Thank you so much for taking the time. Rami Efrati is the former head of the civilian division of the Israel National Cyber Bureau in the Prime Minister's office and is the managing partner at Strategic Consulting Partners. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
We also have with us today Mr. Erez Kreiner. He's the president, co-founder, and head of the Cyber Defense and Technology at 5C Israel, an innovative cybersecurity solutions provider. Mr. Kreiner has also served more than 5 years as the director of Israel's National Cybersecurity Authority. He was responsible for preventing cyber attacks on Israel's critical infrastructure and assets and led the national teams to oversee cyber and data security. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Kreiner. So we'll get right into it right now as we look over into the future. We look to the past to get a bit of information and understanding as we understand history repeats itself. And we'll start here. General Rosen, maybe you can give us a little bit of an overview, everyone can, a little bit of an overview of what is cyber warfare, what is cyber terrorism as a whole. It's clearly evolved over the length of time that we have been around with the internet and technologies. Maybe you can give us a little bit of a starting point. What is cyber warfare?
Well, that's a great question, but just in a few words, I think the best way to explain it is to think that we, in the last few decades, we invented a new domain, humanity, with our own hands and minds, which is a great thing. The interesting part of this is that it became a domain through which we not only utilize cyberspace or the digital landscape which we create for good stuff, like human beings have been through history, this is also used and utilized for bad things. So it's sort of a new domain which we have created, and it's just a mirror of what the human race is. A lot of good stuff, and also the bad stuff comes with it. So today, it's not only a place where we do cool stuff and better lives. It's also a place which is an operational domain, and you can actually threaten today a nation state through cyberspace. You can threaten the political system, you can threaten the economy, and you can threaten military or the defenses of a nation. So it is actually evolved into being an operational space.
And Mr. Kreiner, when we look at it as an operational space, where would you say, in your experience, was the starting point of that being an operational space?
When computer was invented. Well, I would say that the cyber weapon is radically different than other kinds of weapons in the kinetic world. The cyberkinetic world, maybe a very good example would be that you can hit a missile with a virus. You cannot hit a virus with a missile. And actually, with only one type of computer virus, you can hit submarines, you can hit tanks, you can hit airplanes, you can hit radio system, you can hit almost everything that electricity current is streaming inside. So the nature of cyber weapons is much larger than what we have experienced before. And one almost very interesting thing is that you cannot hide from a cyber weapon. It doesn't matter if you are in a submarine or you are in a spaceship or somewhere that you think that you are hiding for something. Cyber can reach you wherever you are. Well, a couple of organizations and countries learn it in a hard way.
General Efrati, if we look at it again from a starting position, has there always been the offensive and defensive capabilities in the cyber world?
We're living in a beautiful time, in a beautiful digital time. Everything is connected. All our life are connected to computers. Before, we didn't have the computers, exactly as Erez said. Meaning, we need to fight with other kind of kinetic weapons, but the minute we started to be involved and to take a part in this digital world, everything was changed. Everything was changed means that from now on, people can attack us not only kinetically, but also via viruses, Trojan horses, and all kind of these beautiful words related to cyber, which really changed our life. And therefore, we have also to take all precautions in order to make sure that our life are secured from this kind of attacks. And these kind of attacks are being used either by nations, by military armies or military organizations, and by also by young people who believe that they can do things that only nations can do as well. And therefore, the cyber war became not only a word, but it also became a part of our life.
As we look at the past few decades, we saw the fall of the Soviet Union. We saw an evolution in technology. We've seen the rise of the United States to be the one supreme power in the world. But we've also seen the rise of other states and non-state actors. And I wanted to ask all three of you if you could please elaborate. When looking at the world as a whole, geopolitics as a whole, has the cyber world leveled the playing field? Are there no more real superpowers in that sense because of the cyber world, that everyone, and the more technologically advanced you are, the more vulnerable you become as well?
Well, let me take the start. When you think about states, they have much more power than terror organization and gangs of hackers. And that's not because the smartest guys are working for states, but because states has intelligence organizations, it has capabilities that terror organization and crime organization cannot have. Because if I need to get a password, I can try to get it remotely through a computer means. But I can also, if I'm a state, I can operate my agents, I can operate my satellites, I can operate other capabilities that others do not have. So there's a scale from the lonely hacker till a state-sponsored organization, that those capabilities are escalating when you go higher and higher, when you have more people to select your hackers from, when you have more money to put in, and when you have the operational capabilities which are coming from the, let's say, from the kinetic world and are diffusing to the cyber world.
Our life was changed. If in the past we used to speak about nations which had the capability of mathematics, computing, AI, etc., meaning countries like the United States of America, Russia, China, Iran, Israel, and others, things were changed. It were changed because from now on we are not speaking about only military attacks, we are speaking about civilian attacks. And these civilian attacks are attacking our life. And this is a big change. That's why suddenly we heard about PETIA, non-PETIA, and other things that attacks hospitals. So suddenly we found out that not only military organizations and nations are taking a part, but also criminals. And in order to use even the latest cyber weapon system, unfortunately, you don't have to be country like the United States with so many computer science engineering, but you can get it in the market. This market called the darknet. And in this darknet, unfortunately, mainly the main users that are doing it are the non-state organizations. Let's make it terrorist organizations and criminals who are able to get the most sophisticated cyber weapon system that were either to be bought in the market, or they were leaked from intelligence organization, even like the NSA and others, and suddenly you can find it in the hands of people who wouldn't have even the chance in their life to come to this kind of weapon system. And this is one of the biggest changes that really happens during the last years.
General Rosen.
I think, to answer simply, yes, it has leveled the field. It has given a chance to much smaller players to get into this field and amplify their powers in a way. But it's not really that you can jump into this field and immediately be a big player. You have to cross some kind of threshold in order to gain capabilities in cyberspace. For nation-state capabilities, there are a few requirements that you need: people, process, technology, many things that we speak about. But the interesting thing, just as my colleagues just mentioned, is that not only nations can get power in cyberspace, and that not only leveled the field, but it brought into the field many new players. And I think that's the complexity we're seeing today, because it's still evolving. It's not something which is stable. I'm not sure it will ever be stable, because it's the new stable is unstable. And I think we will see, on one hand, nations starting to get to be cyber transformed, or going through a cyber transformation process, which builds in many ways their people, their capability, their process, and the technology. That's one side. And the other players, the nations, will have to cope with the other players in this field, the criminals, the terrorists, and the bad actors, which are also utilizing this space in the same way.
So just to build off of that question then, how much does, as you advance in technology and put more of your systems, I guess, online or digitally, does that put you to more vulnerability? As in the past, you would have your infrastructure or your systems separated because there was no connectivity between them. There was no digital age. It was going to take an act of sabotage, kinetic attack on your specific target, whatever it would be. At this point now, we have even seen demonstrations of this type of power in 2007 with the blacking out of Estonia, who is one of the countries, if you will, on the leading edge of digitalizing their entire nation. How much more vulnerable do you become as you digitize your entire infrastructure and your systems and your daily life?
The more sophisticated you are, the more vulnerable you are. And this is, I would say, an axioma. I don't know when was the last time that you tried to repair your car, but if you are not a computer engineer with certification from the manufacturer, probably you cannot do nothing but changing the wheel. Not like the situation that was just 20 or 25 years ago. And this complexity will come and will spread all over the thing that you see around. If you just take a look around in this studio, you will see how many computers there are. They control everything from climate to spotlights and etc. And they are vulnerable to a cyber attack. That wasn't the situation 5 years ago. And we are in the beginning of a process that everything is going to be computerized, and thus everything is going to be vulnerable. And that goes from the things that you wear, because you'll have computers in your clothes, and it goes to under skin medical devices, because already insulin injectors and pacemaker are already computerized. Are going to have much more than that in the future, and you're going to have remote operation done by doctors from 10,000 miles away. So everything is going to be vulnerable, and this is the nice side of the story. The other side of the story is that you need to protect against those malicious things that we just spoke.
I think that when you see how quickly the digital landscape is growing, it's growing exponentially, especially in the IoT, Internet of Things area. Yeah, it's just like growing grounds. It's just like giving in the physical world. If you have a specific country which is this big, this wide, and has a few hundreds of miles in Israel's size, let's say 22,000 kilometers big, and now let's say we would add more land and more mountains and more grounds to protect. It will require more forces. Now, so physically, since the digital landscape is growing, yes, we will get more and more vulnerable on one hand. We will need to invest more in the defenses of these areas. But the other hand is that the grounds, the landscape is not the same in every place it is. Not everything is vulnerable, and not everything is prone to attack, because you need incentives. So I think the best way to look at it is through what are the incentives of the bad actors, and what do nations have to protect when they grow more and more digital, which is what is going to happen in the next decades forever again. So I think in that sense, this is where countries and nations and law enforcement and government agencies, this is where they have to focus. What are the critical assets of a country? What are the critical processes you want to defend? And through that, you organize the forces which are necessary. And the last thing is that, unlike other domains which you send the policemen or the border patrol or the military to physically protect the border, here the civilians are participating in the defense itself. It's not only security, they're part of the borders, so they have to participate. That's why you need the regulator to help regulate and write laws to help protect and help create a very, let's call it clean and a good area to healthy domain to protect in the civilian space. How banks defend themselves, how others, and etc.
The new digital era opened a huge intelligence field. If in the past, what did we use? We use SIGINT, we use the OSINT, we use the satellite intelligence and other. Suddenly, using our regular days systems made us much more vulnerable also about our intelligence, or let's call it even about our privacy. Because suddenly every system that we are using becomes also our adversary. Meaning suddenly, if somebody would like to know what is going on in my house, he's just going to the vacuum cleaner, which is fully remote control and also updating the cloud. And suddenly somebody, I don't know where, is able even to see what is going on in my house. And if I'm using any kind of computers, all my emails are there. So they know also about what are my feelings, what do I do, how do I expect to do things. So the minute our life are fully digitized, at that exact minute, intelligence had to be changed. Intelligence against terrorism, intelligence against nations, and I think that one of the biggest market today is the intelligence market, not used only by nations and intelligence organizations, but also by companies. Because the most important issue is information. So people are looking for information. That's why while I'm having my smartphone and I own it, at that minute, I don't know how many suppliers are getting information. Where I am, what am I doing, how do I do it, did I move from country to country, etc. And this information worth a lot of money. And while it worth a lot of money, it can also be used against me. as a private person or as a nation or about other things as well. And therefore, when we are speaking today about cyber terrorism, one of the biggest issues is the digitalization. And if you are speaking with organizations who are not using almost any digitized solutions, which is not existing, of course, then your business becomes very difficult as before. You need to go for the human intelligence. You need to go for others as well. But digitization changed our life, and therefore both regular people, nations, terrorist organizations started to realize we have to be less vulnerable and we have to invest a lot of money. So one of the biggest message that I have today is that cyber is going to be much more robust, much more sophisticated, but also it is a great, great business.
Yeah, it seems like it's a great business as we do see our private information.
Let me please tell you something about business. I'm not going to encourage anybody to become a black hat hacker, which means a bank robber or something like that. But I heard in a very honorable occasion some American experts saying that about 95% of stealing money from financial institution is done through computer means. So if 95% are done by hackers, then probably if you look at American jail, you would see that 95 of the robbers sitting in jail are hackers. And you see them playing with computers and not with other things. But I guess it's not the situation. So maybe it's not that only 95% is going to those hackers, but probably it's a very safe domain to be in, because this is really hard to catch those bad hackers, let's call them that way, because they're very sophisticated, they're very good at what they're doing, and they can do it from so far away that there's almost no police organization in the world that can chase somebody in another continent.
By the way, one of the biggest change that happened because of the digital age is the problem of attribution. If somebody from the Gaza Strip is going to launch a missile on Israel, it will take us about, let's say, very short time to identify exactly where it was launched from and to attack it. When it comes with the cyber, usually nobody is coming with this transparent saying, I'm the one who did it. Usually on April 7 every year, Israel is having a great chance to protect itself from a kind of, let's call it anonymous attack by its activism organization, which you can say, okay, it is nothing, it's not a nation, etc. But for Israel, it is a great chance because we have a scenario. We don't have to pay for this scenario. Nobody's leaking us what is going to happen. But to make it short, we are taking it very seriously.
Almost like a training exercise.
It's a training exercise, a national training exercise, which is amazing, which is important, and which has its benefits as well. So the attribution issue is one of the most important things when you are dealing with cyber. And therefore, one of the biggest changes that happened during the last 3 years, I believe, is that from now on, you don't need to buy the cyber weapon systems in the darknet. You can get it as a service. Intelligence as a service, attack as a service. Everything is now as a service, the price is less. So you don't need to invest in human capital, in academia, and others in order to do it. Hopefully, the scale is not as huge today as I believe it is going to be, but we will see.
And as we move on in our discussion, I'd like to just give our listeners and our viewers a little bit of insight on what do you guys believe are the capabilities of terrorist organizations in the cyber sphere right now? Because we've touched on cyber warfare, we've touched on the capabilities and the scale of a lone actor sitting as an activist in their basement with a computer and ability to hack, maybe send a denial of service attack of some sort. We've talked about criminal organizations looking to use ransomware and things like that. You just spoke about bank robbers, for example. but what are the capabilities of terrorists on the internet as non-state actors? And as a follow-up to that in that sense is, how are terrorists using it? Not just the capabilities that they have, because sometimes you have the capabilities but you don't use it. So it's a matter of capability plus motivation, etc. And so looking at it, what do you think are some of the capabilities that terrorist organizations have? And what are some of the methods and uses that terrorists right now are using the cybersphere for?
I would mention three areas which are interesting, I think. First of all, I think the amplification of the message is a first issue. If I was a terrorist or a very bad guy a few years ago, let's say I lived in New Zealand and I hate immigrants, the chances of me to meet another crazy person like me were very, very slim. And today, through cyberspace, I can really get a large crowd organized, and all of them fall in love with the idea, and the idea is spread to many other continents. And I just live in New Zealand, and one day I wake up, take a semi-automatic weapon, and go and kill many, many people. So just the amplification of the messaging is an amazing effect. The second thing is the operational capability. The capability to organize through cyberspace. It's the means of communication. How do terrorists communicate in ISIS in the Sinai Peninsula or in the deserts of Iraq or Syria? With WhatsApp. I mean, it's end-to-end encryption. Nobody knows how. It's really hard to look at what they're doing, and even if they just use Gmail and write drafts, and everybody has the same password to the account, again, it's a really good means of communication, and it enables operational planning and in a different scale. And the third thing, I think, is what we just spoke about, is the weapons of mass destruction. In cyberspace, there's a market out there. So not only nations can buy this stuff, it's out there, and it's walking around. And stuff that the NSA was in the NSA today is in the hands of terrorists. It's like just nuclear stuff, walking around. Being sold to the highest bidder. So I think just these three things from the side of the bad guys, the terrorists, is a very worrying vector in this area.
The characteristics of the cyber weapons are very strange. Unlike a kinetic weapon, you cannot measure it in any scale that humanity use. I mean, it has no length, it has no weight, it has no smell, it has nothing that we can see or feel with our senses, or even with most of the machines that we use in order to measure something. So actually, when I shoot something, when I shoot a cyber weapon against someone else, what do I shoot? Do I shoot, wisdom? Do I shoot smartness? What do I shoot? Those electrons that jump from one cell to another are not exactly the cyber. So when you think of it in a bit of philosophic way, the cyber weapon is really something from another domain, from another space. And that's actually what the cyber brought to our day-to-day life. It brought something that goes with you all around, that is with you whenever you are. And let me tell you something. Look at the United States. Last time that foreign boots were on American soil was in 1812, when the British tried to invade something and they were chased to Canada after a while. But now, cyber brings the war to American neighborhoods. Suddenly, J.P. Morgan cannot open his branches, and they suffer for something in their own neighborhood. It's not 5,000 miles in Panama or 10,000 miles in Iraq or Afghanistan. It's there in American soil. That brings the war to places that has never been before, and it makes it much harder to fight with, because you do not expect your bank manager to be a warrior. Maybe you do, but most of them are not.
Only in Israel.
Yeah. So,
Go to Miluim.
so yeah, exactly. So this is part of the stranger things about cyber and the future that we need to expect.
It's not easy to control cyber attack. Let's imagine that you are going to make a kind of cyber attack, or a terrorist is going to do it. It is not almost possible to control it. Meaning, if you aim against Israel, you don't know whether it is not going to come to you back, or whether it's going to come to other friendly organization that you would not like to attack. So the main problem about cyber attack systems are whether they are somehow controlled. And the world is trying yet to come out with new regulations and with new norms. Even the UN is dealing with it, about all kind of cyber attacks. Who is able to do it? Can we identify a digital border, etc., etc. But we have to remember one thing. If nations are trying to do it, I believe that they have much more possibility to control it. Even then, it is not fully controlled. But when it comes from terrorist organization, you never know how it is going to affect you. You also asked another question. What about the difference between, let's call it, terrorism organization and a nation? If I'm speaking about the Hezbollah, I'm not speaking about the Hezbollah. I'm speaking about Iran. Is Iran strong enough to attack Israel on cyber? We have seen many reports coming from Checkpoint, CyberArk, all these other companies about what's going on, and some others as well. So let's believe that it is also in the hands of the Hezbollah. If the Hamas cannot get it by himself or get it from another country, he can get it from others. I'm speaking about this region. Of course, if we are speaking about other regions as well, it is possible to get it. I totally agree with General Yaron about what he said, that, okay, these organizations, they don't have a military echelon. Usually, one is can be in Saudi Arabia, one will be in Yemen, somebody can be in another place. They have to communicate. So how do they communicate? They communicate with our regular application that we are using as well. And if somebody is going to attack through this application, suddenly it can be also used against them. So the question about regulations, norms, all over the world should be somehow identified. The Tallinn and in Estonia, they tried to do it. And the world is going to try and do things. It's not going to be so easy. It is not easy. It is not going as fast as maybe diplomats would like to do it. But it is a part of our life. So you can ask, okay, how we are going to protect ourselves? I'm not coming to all kind of solutions, and we are very proud that only in Israel we have more than 450 companies dealing with cybersecurity. But I'm speaking about one word, awareness. How can you be aware about somebody who is going to attack you? And in this case, you don't need always to have the best cybersecurity technical solutions, but at least listen and learn not to push the button when it comes to you, not to answer every SMS, etc., etc.
I think something that you all brought up and touched on was attribution. How do we attribute a specific attack to a specific person? And I think that goes very well into my next question is, when we look at cyber attacks as a whole, be it from a nation state or be it from a terrorist organization or a lone hacker, and the problem with attribution. But what about the problem of retribution? When we look at kinetic warfare today, we can use the latest example of what went on in Gaza this past week. They shoot a rocket at us and we shoot some rockets back at them. They shoot a couple of guns at us, we end up shooting a couple of guns back. There is almost like a designated line that states, well, if they do this, we can do that. If we do this, they can do that. A tit-for-tat situation. In the cyber world, it doesn't feel that there is that same rules, if you will. The same, the rules of the game have changed in that sense. And so if we use an example of Hamas or Hezbollah, who as mentioned, has the backing of Iran, and in that sense has a nation state directing their ability on the cyber world, were to attack Israel in some capacity on a cyber net, be it take down some electrical grids, take down banking system, whatever it may be, how do we attribute it, first of all, to Hezbollah if they don't take credit for it right away? And then how do you retrieve retribution for such a thing? How do you punish and deter your enemies from doing such a thing? As we know here in Israel, for example, they hit 100 Gazan targets to one rocket that was shot in Israel as a point to make it that this is deterrence. Don't shoot rockets at us because you're going to get hit 100 times harder. Is that rule in the cyber world as well? Do we know what the game is there in that sense? If we get hit by Hezbollah, is there a hierarchy of that states? Yes, they hit electrical infrastructure, so we can go after X, Y, and Z. How do we look at it from that perspective?
I think that the most absurd thing is how fast things travel in cyberspace, but actually it's a very slow battlefield because you make many preparations, and it's a covert operation when you prepare an attack and you hit in an instance, but the pace before you hit is very slow because you can't make mistakes, otherwise you'll be revealed. In that sense, I think cyberspace is very unique, and you mentioned deterrence because the mechanisms for effective deterrence are not there in cyberspace yet, as you just said. Clearly. And so attribution, the biggest investments that, whether it is nations or companies, which were mentioned before, the biggest investment is in intelligence. If you will not know in cyberspace where this is coming from, the attribution part will be very slow. And by the time you understand who it is, the context will be so different you can't you won't be able to get retribution. So I think in that sense, the biggest investment for nation states is in the intelligence area. This is still the largest investment, the biggest investments which nations have to get into, meaning that this is not security. This is not standing on the fence with new technologies and understanding lateral movement and all these buzzwords, knowing better where this is coming from. No, this is, active intelligence on the grounds of your, on the borders and inside your enemy territory, because that's how cyberspace is. Go all the way to your enemy to understand when he's opening the door to go to your place. That's how active you have to be with the intelligence in cyberspace. When you have that, then you can think what to do. So that is the first step that will allow, after fact, attribution, and later on, with anything you need, retribution. But the other thing which is interesting is, I always say in cyberspace, when you have a house made of glass, be careful before you throw stones. So in cyberspace, it's like this. If you get hit in cyberspace, you maybe want to get back outside of cyberspace. So I start seeing countries snatching hackers and putting them into jail, putting APBs or whatever on people that are bad actors in cyberspace. So the physical price that these people are paying, or these countries are paying, or bad institutions are paying because they are allowing bad acting in cyberspace, is getting higher and higher. So attribution, one, and two, is it's asymmetric warfare we're fighting here. It's not symmetric. So you have to hit back in cyberspace, but also out of cyberspace.
Let me tell you something about hit and revenge or whatever. It's pretty hard to kill someone with bare hands. It's a bit easier with a knife and much easier with a sniper rifle. Doing it with other kinds of weapons is easier and easier. But when you are in the cyberspace, you don't see the opponent. You don't feel the opponent. You have no feeling. You don't see. You don't look at his eyes. Never. And it's very easy to click the enter button and then launch the attack. and to identify you, how hard it is, we all learned just about, 2 years ago or something like that, when an 18-year-old hacker just fooled the FBI and other police organizations all over the world that were trying to catch him for more than 3 years. An 18-year-old guy against all those organizations and people cops that are chasing him. So that problem of identifying, and the problem that even if you identify somebody which is a real enemy or a real opponent, maybe you don't want him to know that you cut him. Maybe you want to do a counter strike. So this game of intelligence and this game of fooling everybody is exponentially played in the cyber domain.
Some people say in Hebrew, Hakam leorgecha, ashkem leorgo. Which means if somebody is coming to kill you, do it before. And this created a new issue of the proactive, which is now a big issue, and a lot of academias are dealing with it, and also some countries as well, which means, okay, let's imagine that I'm one of the Israeli financial institutions, somebody is attacking me and I knew about it, so I'm going to attack him back. It's a big question. Speaking about intelligence, there is a big, huge difference between military intelligence and cyber intelligence. Not that the military is not to be involved, not that all the intelligence organizations should be involved, but most of the intelligence is already existing, and it is existing on the civilian sector. So it's much easier also to use this kind of intelligence and to buy it. And the last thing, referring to your question, it doesn't mean that if somebody is attacking us on cyber, we should not attack him on a kinetic. And Panetta was speaking about it when he was the head of the defense in the United States of America. He said, if we are going to identify who attacked us kinetically, it was on Ops USA, we are going to attack him. If we would identify who attacked us on a cyber way, we are going to attack him also kinetically. So this creates a lot of questions that I'm not sure that we will have the time to speak about it today, but it shows that complexity of dealing with cyber, both on the defense and also, of course, in the offense area.
As we are pressed for time and everyone has joined us, and we did set a set time, so I'm not going to go too much over, but I do want to ask you guys about the intersection of morality, ethics, law, and the cyber world. I think it's a really interesting subject. You guys all are in the private sector now, so regulated as well by governments. But also when you sit there and you look out into the world that we are now, the cyber world started off really as like the Wild West, like we used to see in the cowboy movies and the pioneers going out to the new frontier. There were no rules, there were no laws. You didn't like someone, you can duel with them, and one of you will die at the end of the day. As time has progressed, in my short lifespan, I have watched it turn from the Wild West to a regulated world where you can get in trouble for posting something on the internet. You can get in trouble for doing things on the internet. And as we look to it now, at what point do we give up our civil liberties on privacy, etc., for security, on the other hand? Because, as mentioned earlier in our discussion here, the privacy of the citizens is up for grabs right now in that sense. As we look to the future, artificial intelligence is entering the field in a much stronger domain than ever before. We are going to have issues with facial recognition and then piecing together all of the different information. And at what point do our civil liberties, the law, ethics, morality all intersect? And are we going to be heading towards a world where everything is extremely regulated, or are we heading towards some sort of middle ground?
We live today in a sort of what I call a permissionless world. You have many new actors, and we stopped liking the bodies which tell us what to do tomorrow, today, the next minute. So we want to do what we think we want to do. And it's like this for individuals, for organizations, for groups, and for everyone. So governments are having a really hard time today, nation states, as they were invented, which are responsible for law and order, the borders, and the prosperity and security of the citizens. We're all having a hard time understanding what the role of the government should be in this permissionless world. So I think the first thing that governments will have to grasp and put their hands on is the role they want to play as governments. Otherwise, it will be a borderless world, because we see what cyberspace does in this world. Again, the good parts are great and need to be amplified, but the bad parts and the bad acting has to be contained and regulated and defeated if needed. So just like in the physical world, we have organized strategy and operational capability and tactical capabilities, we have to organize the forces, define responsibilities and accountable forces which are responsible for cyberspace. And once we have that, the only thing which is left, which is a very hard line, is the tension between privacy and security. This line is a line which has to be drawn between the citizens and the government. Where do you want to be? And we saw what happened after 9/11, and then after Snowden, and now we're in a different place. We have to all find the middle ground, which will allow law enforcement and government agencies to be responsible and capable of protecting their citizens, and on the other hand, of course, not go into the private world of the citizens on the other hand and exploit this to bad acting by the government itself. So I think this is what we will see in the coming years in this sense.
Well, I would say it's a Wild West, and this is only the beginning of the Wild West, because the real Wild West, as you mentioned, has borders, has limitation. Territories do not expand. Cyberspace is expanding all the time. New things are being invented, and because it is man-created or human-created domain or space, it's not like the oceans, it's not like the land, it's not like what we know from before the cyber age. And laws will continue to chase the technology inventions, and we are going to live with this, I don't know, paradox maybe, or paradigm maybe, of difficulties to understand where is the line that crossed the, I would say, the capabilities, the technology capabilities, human rights, and all other moral and ethics that we already have in the physical world.
Since we are running out of time, I'll do it very quickly. I believe that the key word is going to be international cooperation. Only if there will be a way, first of all, to communicate directly between countries, because the same virus which attacks Israel in the speed of light is going to attack also Norway. If we are not going to somehow coordinate our activities and share the intelligence, which I believe is one of the only ways how to secure the world, it will not work. The same way, without any international cooperation, who will come out with the guidelines of how we should behave. Some people will not agree, some people will agree, but at least it will come out with the right norms, how to do things. This is going to change our life. See what happened with Facebook. See what happened with other huge commercial organizations, including when we are speaking about the elections. When suddenly these big organizations started to try and find out the trolls, the bots that are affecting our lives, and take them away. Things are going to change. It is not going to be a one-day process. But I believe that at the end, while having more and more, it's not regulations, but norms, this is going to, at least I believe, to help, if not so much, at least to start with a very important process.
I think you brought up a very interesting point there at the end. Professor Gano, who's the founder of the ICT here at the IDC, has always mentioned it takes a network to beat a network. And we're seeing that the capabilities of the terrorists are, as mentioned, General Rosen said, that this is how they communicate. With WhatsApp, someone standing in the desert in Iraq will communicate with someone in Afghanistan or Yemen or wherever it may be. And is it possible, as we let you guys go now, in one final answer, yes or no in that sense, is it possible in the future for all of these nation states that are rivals in the real world for many different things to be able to work together to build that network to defeat the network of terrorists?
No.
No.
No. And no.
I agree.
No.
A dim ending to our very wonderful conversation. But we are happy that we have people such as yourselves on the front lines defending our critical infrastructure, defending our cybersphere, where we are all connected now with one another in every way. Mr. Erez Kreiner, president, co-founder, and head of Cyber... No?
Who was in the past?
Yes, in the past. Of Cyber Defense
Former.
and Technology at 5C. Brigadier General Reserves Rami Efrati, Managing Partner at Strategic Consulting Partners. And Brigadier General Retired Yaron Rosen. Thank you so much for joining us here in studio at the Counter-Terrorism Today, brought to us by the ICT and IDC Radio. Thank you to our viewers on any one of the multiple platforms in the cyber world, watching us today and listening to us all over the globe. Thank you so much to the three of you in this distinguished panel. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Counter-Terrorism Today.